Oh, here he is. Cool.
How you doing?
Doing good, man.
You can hear me all right?
I can hear you great. Yeah.
Sweet. Good to talk to you again.
Yeah. Nice to be here. Range my window. Cool. So I'll just say that while I made this topic, it was at my friend's request here. So I'll give you kind of the option. I don't know how you want to approach this. We can talk a little bit about the legality as the Supreme Court and what they've ruled on the Second Amendment, or we can talk about constitutional intent, or just kind of your own idea. So what way would you like to approach the topic?
I kind of want to approach it from all fronts because, again, since these are relaxed, it's more of a conversational learning thing for both of us. So,
Okay.
If you want to start first, that's fine.
Sure.
It's up to you.
Sure. So let's look at the Supreme Court. Generally speaking, the court has ruled that there are limitations to the Second Amendment of various kinds, and their decisions and opinions have changed over time, so we can talk a little bit about that. There are not really that many Second Amendment cases in constitutional and the Supreme Court rules. It hasn't come up a whole lot, and most of them are actually very recent. But one of the first ones was in 1939. So the U.S. Supreme Court considered a matter in the United States versus Miller. The court adopted a collective rights approach in this case, determining that Congress could regulate the sawed-off shotgun that had moved in interstate commerce under the National Firearms Act of 1934 because the evidence did not suggest that the gun had some reasonable relationship to the preservation or efficiency of a well-regulated militia. So the court then explained that the framers included the Second Amendment to ensure the effectiveness of the military. That was its primary purpose. Since the sawed-off shotgun wasn't good for that, then they could restrict his use of it. So that was in 1939, and that pretty much stayed the case for about 70 years. Nobody really challenged the Second Amendment on those grounds during that time. But in 2008, the Supreme Court revisited the issue in District of Columbia versus Heller, which is a now pretty famous case. And the plaintiff Heller challenged the constitutionality of the Washington, D.C. handgun ban, a statute that had stood for 32 years. Many considered the statute to be the most stringent in the nation. 5-4 decision, so a close decision, but nonetheless majority of the court, detailed the history and tradition of the Second Amendment at the time of the Constitutional Convention, proclaimed that the Second Amendment established an individual right for U.S. citizens to possess firearms, and struck down the D.C. handgun ban as a violation of that right. The majority carved out Miller as an exception to a general rule that Americans may possess firearms, claiming that law-abiding citizens cannot use sawed-off shotguns for any law-abiding purpose. Similarly, the court in its dicta found regulations of similar weaponry that cannot be used for law-abiding purposes as laws that would not implicate the Second Amendment. So if you want to do something that is not one of the sort of prescribed law-abiding purposes, meaning self-defense or hunting or something along those lines, then the Second Amendment doesn't necessarily protect you. So if your gun is mostly useful for criminal activities or for, say, attacking U.S. military personnel, then it would not be protected under the Second Amendment. And so that was the most recent ruling. There's been a few more rulings after that in which basically they reiterated what they said in District of Columbia versus Heller. So long as and they've also specified that it is a portable firearm. So it has to be something that you pick up and carry around and use as a weapon, tank or something. So those are the limitations that the Supreme Court currently has. It has to be for legal purpose. It has to be a personal firearm of some kind. And it has to be... let's see what's the right word. Any restrictions that the state tries to apply have to be not reasonably infringe that right. So there are some regulations that you can have. So it's not an unabridged right. So you can, they can make you register your weapons so long as the registration process isn't onerous. Things of that nature. They can require background checks. Because, again, it doesn't actually stop you from getting a weapon. They noted specifically that if you're a criminal or have a history of mental illness, that is not a justification that would be protected under the Second Amendment. So those are the kind of limitations that the Supreme Court has kind of laid out. So you can definitely own your own weapon. The state can't tell you that you can't. However, the weapon has to be kind of legitimate, and there has to be no other overriding state interests that would preclude the right. Because while the rights are in the Constitution, there are situations under which they don't apply. because the state has what's called an overriding interest in protecting the public in some way, shape, or form. So that's the basic kind of legal construct as we have it today, which under the resolution, if you want to follow the Supreme Court's justification, then there are some limitations to the Second Amendment.
Yes. I agree with like the main line of the topic of saying like that in its current state, that right now our right to bear arms has limitations. And so my main point is that I disagree with those limitations.
Sure.
And so my main purpose or that I see of the Second Amendment is self-defense and also prevention of tyranny. So those were the two most common agreed upon by the founding fathers of why we have the Second Amendment. You'll also notice that even current senators like Ted Cruz have supported that it is a right to prevent against tyranny. He recently stated during his campaign, he said, the Second Amendment to the Constitution isn't just for protecting hunting rights. It's not only to safeguard your right to target practice. It is a constitutional right to protect your children, your family, your home, our lives, and to serve as the ultimate check against government tyranny for the protection of liberty. So that was his kind of take on it, and I definitely agree with it. You'll notice some quotes from the founding fathers. George Mason's, I asked, sir, what is the militia? It is the whole people. To disarm them is the best and most effectual way to enslave them. The Zachariah Johnson, the people are not to be disarmed of their weapons. They're to be left in full possession of them. Sorry, I have this down here.
No problem.
Just trying to find the Thomas Jefferson one.
Well, I've got one I can share.
The Constitution of most of our states assert that all power is inherent in the people and it is their right and duty to be at all times armed. So the way I look at it is that the Second Amendment is our ultimate check against government tyranny. So we have our First Amendment, we have our 14th Amendment, we have rights to legislate the prevention of tyranny and checks and balances and things like that. I view the Second Amendment as the ultimate fail-safe in and of this isn't for law-abiding purposes. This is for, okay, the government has drastically overstepped its bounds. It is time to protect our freedoms. You mentioned the resolutions on law-abiding purposes. I don't necessarily agree that the Second Amendment was intended to be entirely, when it's exercised in its fullness of prevention of government tyranny, that's not really a law-abiding purpose. And then you also mentioned that the weapon being mobile and things like that. We have a charter from James Madison where charter ships were writing to him asking if the Second Amendment only applied to rifles and small arms or if it applied to artillery and cannons as well, to which James Madison instantly replied, of course it applies to artillery and cannons, like the Second Amendment is absolute. So I'm interested to see what you think as far as I won't dispute the Supreme Court cases because those are what those people ruled. I disagree with their conclusions, but given what I believe to be the original intent of the Second Amendment and how it can be effectively carried out, like, what do you think about that?
Well, as I mentioned in the last debate we had, the Second Amendment was written in the context that it only applied to the federal government. So the states were able to restrict the right to bear arms to their citizens. Some of the states at the time had constitutions that protected the right to bear arms of individuals, and some didn't. And the Bill of Rights only applied to the federal government. It was a restriction on what the federal government could do, not what the state governments could do with respect to their citizens. Now, at the time, when they were arguing for the Constitution in the Federalist Papers, James Madison talked about the Second Amendment a little bit, and his focus was definitely on the idea of a militia. So the whole idea was that the states didn't want to be oppressed by the federal government. They didn't want the federal government to become a tyranny and control them. So the states had their own militias, forces, and so the idea was they really didn't want the federal government to have a big standing army. That's gone, right? They have a huge standing army now, biggest in the world. They wanted the states to have stronger militias that could defeat the federal army relatively easily if it came to that. Now, if the federal government could ban firearms from individuals, then they wouldn't be able to maintain these militias, which were the whole cornerstone of the idea, right? So that's why the word well-regulated militia, being necessary for the security of a free state, meaning the individual states, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So the reason you have to have the people have arms is so that a state can be free by virtue of the state's well-regulated militia. And it says well-regulated. There's a reason for that. So here's what James Madison said in Federalist Papers 46 about this issue. Now, he starts a little by, I'm not going to read this part, where he tries to figure out how many people the standing army should have. And he has kind of a ratio figured out. He says, the proportion would not yield in the United States an army of more than 25 or 30,000 men. To these would be opposed a militia amounting of near 500,000 of citizens armed in their hands, officered by men chosen among themselves, fighting for their common liberties, and united and contributed and conducted by governments possessing their affections and confidence. It may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumcised could ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. So he's talking about the military of the United States government, and his vision is that each of the states would have their own militia. They're not standing armies, right? They're to be called up, right? So you call up the men in arms, they bring their arms out to the central square, then the state government provides leaders for these men to organize them into military regiments, to give them structure and purpose, because the way military used to be organized back in that time was you had, any given area would raise some guys in their militia. And so they would be like the 2nd Virginian. You see this a lot in the Civil War. So all the guys would come from the same town, basically, or the same area. And they would have a local leader, and that's their guy, and then that's their little military unit. And then you take that military unit and you combine it with some others, and you get higher up general military officials. Those would be the actual officers. So in this case, the state is going to provide the military command under the guise of the governor, who's going to have state militia people who are organizing and commanding these armies. And then they, in the guise of the state, would be fighting for the state's sovereignty. It's not like Red Dawn where you got guys running around, with guns in the woods, taking pot shots at Nazis or whatever, right? That's not really the idea. This is about a federal government military unit versus state-manned, citizen-manned military units. So he's like, well, the federal government is never going to be able to take over because it's not powerful enough, right? And the states are going to be way stronger. And so long as they can keep their arms in the states, they're going to have more guys, as long as we keep the federal government limited. But what we know is, in the reality of our life, is that federal government has the largest army in the world, has 1/3 of the entire world's military budget, could destroy the planet, pretty much literally, is unequaled by anyone in the world. Certainly unequaled by, say, the state of Missouri. Yeah. We had a civil war, right, in which states said, you know what, we're out. Sorry, guys. We're going to raise our own military. And then, and the federal government's like, well, we better get some people in case fighting breaks out. And they said, well, we better call up the militias and well, that's not really going to work. So we're going to create an army. So we're going to fight it out, because was any one individual state going to fight the United States government? Not a chance in hell. They had to band together. They still lost. It's not a realistic scenario. It's never going to work. Even when they abandoned all these principles and they created a new federal government in the South, they bound all the states together. And basically they had all the military units in all of those states, including those who used to be part of the federal military, had joined them. They still lost. So the idea that individual citizens with their arms, right, are going to beat a military that blows away anything that we've ever seen in the history of the world, without any organization whatsoever, B, any funding, C, the kind of military equipment that the United States has access to, is just mind-bogglingly impossible, right? It's never going to work. So as an ultimate check, it doesn't work. It's not ultimate in the sense that it actually trumps federal power. It's not ultimate in the idea that as a last gap, that it's better than any other mechanism. It's actually kind of like the weakest most unlikely mechanism we'll ever have to protect our rights.
Then why is it the mechanism that everyone goes after first? My point is that you notice that before every government has tyrannical tendencies and becomes tyrannical, you notice gun control. Let's look at Turkey. Established gun control in 1911. From 1915 to 1917, 1.5 million Armenians unable to defend themselves were rounded up and exterminated. The Soviet Union established gun control in 1929. From 1929 to 1953, nearly 20 million dissidents unable to defend themselves were rounded up and exterminated. Same thing happened in Germany with the Jews. Same thing happened when China established communism. All of these things were prefaced with gun control. And
yeah,
so,
but the gun control didn't work. I mean, people in China, they had a revolutionary war. They had a revolutionary war in Russia as well. The militia, the citizens fought back and they lost.
Yes, but 20 million people still died because guns were being taken. Right. Look at the...
Yeah, but look, you could say the same thing in America. Let's say tomorrow that President Trump decides that he hates guns, and he orders that all the guns be taken away. What's going to happen? What's going to play out? Tell me how that plays out in your scenario.
Okay, logically, you would notice that. Okay, can I take with this scenario? Can I take of the things that have already been set in place by President Obama with Operation Jade, Helm, and other things?
Maybe, because I want to illustrate all the different barriers that exist before you get to the point where you go Rambo with your pistol.
Okay, I'm not talking about going Rambo with my pistol. The whole idea is it works into your state militias of Minutemen being ready to be called at any point. If citizens, I'm not talking about your redneck standing on his trailer shooting, taking pot shots. I'm talking about people going underground and fighing. Organizing,
but there are no such. I mean, there's no real organizations like that. There's a few kind of Yahoo ones out there. The kind of, you've got the guys who were in Waco, Texas. You got your Ridge guys. You got your Unabomber. You got your Timothy McVeigh. Right? There are guys out there who are like, I am ready to fight the government. They're evil and tyrannical already. Right?
Well, I'm not talking about.
I mean, who are we talking about?
If you saw gun confiscation, first of all, you wouldn't see the entire military fight with it. That's logical. Soldiers won't do their own soldiers. We saw gun confiscation in Katrina, and many of the platoons that were ordered to carry out the order refused to carry out the order to confiscate guns in Katrina.
Right. Well, there's one of the protections that will stand a much better chance of protecting you.
Yes, but these are U.S. citizens believing in the right to bear arms.
They're U.S. citizens believing in the right of not having a tyrannical government. But they'd probably do the same thing if they were ordered to take away your freedom of speech or take away other freedoms that you have as well.
Yes, but they were preserving the right to bear arms in this case. Am I correct?
Well, I don't know the specifics of the situation.
Do you not know about? Okay, so in Katrina, there were looters that were shooting U.S. soldiers, and so George Bush issued an executive order to have the soldiers that were there go door to door and start confiscating weapons. And so many of the soldiers just flat out refused. Some did carry it out as expected, but
I'm very dubious that that's true. But I'll have to look it up.
I had a buddy whose dad was actually in Katrina during the time, and he received the order, and his platoon flat out refused. So the order did happen, and the order was carried out. I kind of want to. We're kind of getting.
You said the order was carried out, but it wasn't carried out, right?
By some it was, but different platoons did carry it out. Different platoons didn't. It was kind of some clash there. We're getting into the weeds a little bit. I really want to get back to the limitations and things like that. I believe that as it stands, that I won't go to the extreme and say that everybody should be able to have F-16s if they have the money to buy them, because I think that's a really in the weeds debate to have.
Sure, it's not likely to happen.
It's not likely. It's not practical. What I kind of want to set around this debate is, would you agree with a full repeal of the NFA that would allow for full sale of automatic weapons with background checks, full sale of suppressors, full sale of SBRs, things like that, that no, we're not getting our artillery, we're not getting our howitzer cannons, but like you at least see civilians being able to buy small arms that the military is able to own. Would that be reasonable?
I don't understand what point that would have.
Because it is our right as the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. It doesn't say what arms.
I disagree. Well, I happen to agree with the Supreme Court. I think that there are that if you have the right to bear arms, and arms are, let's be honest, they're weapons designed to kill people, right? That if you're not going to use them for a purpose that is legitimate in society, then the state has an interest, and they can and are used for purposes that are contrary to the safety of society, then the state has an obligation to make those restrictions.
Okay. But I understand that they want to make those restrictions, but how would those restrictions?
Well, they have a reason to. Yeah. They want to. The idea is that you protect the public, right? So part of protecting the public is allowing the public to defend themselves. But I don't need a fully automatic weapon in order to defend myself against a guy who wants to.
Because I have to need it.
I do. The government does, right?
Yeah, but
because it's a conflict. The way the Supreme Court works, and the way the Second Amendment and all the amendments work, is there's a state interest in protecting the public, and there is a right that the public holds to their liberty, and these two have to be weighed against each other. Now, generally speaking, the public's rights are valued very highly, and there's what's called the compelling state interest test, which is the strongest test that the Supreme Court applies. Some rights don't get this; they get a lower standard, but most of the time with Second Amendment, usually compelling state interest. The state has to have a compelling state interest that will abrogate the right that they want to go against. Now, with this, with Supreme Court and the Second Amendment, they actually haven't decided what the test is, whether they're doing compelling state interest. That gets used all the time for like freedom of speech, a really fundamental one. They haven't really decided what the test is because they have these guidelines as to where it has a legal purpose or not. So they haven't had to contest that very strongly. You know, generally, most of the justices have agreed. Look, if it's a weapon that's only useful for committing crimes, or if the weapon just useful for terrorism, then no, right? Because the only reason you would have it is to do harm to people. So we're just going to say, yeah, you don't get that. However, if the weapon is going to be useful for self-defense, if it's going to be useful for whatever other legitimate pursuits that you want to put it to, then you absolutely have that right, and the state can't take it away from you. So that's the way it's weighed. Now, I don't know what somebody's going to do with a fully automatic M16 that's going to be protecting their right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, other than they just like the noise of it going off, right? Yeah, but that's the thing. If it's just sort of like, I want to do anything I want, I can't come to your house and pee on your stuff, right? I can't. There's a lot of things I can't do because.
You can. I just have the right to tell you to get out of my house.
Well, and the police have the right to arrest me because I'm, so the law comes into play.
Where you're mistaking this is you don't have the right to come impede on the house because you are impeding my right to property, correct? Now, if I want to go out and buy a fully automatic firearm, or I want to go buy a suppressor, or I want to go buy a short-barreled rifle, that inherently is not impeding anyone else's rights, is it?
It poses a significant danger to the public.
But is the
justification
the danger? But there are plenty of things that pose danger. When I go out and purchase a car, I can buy a car. I have to have a license to drive it, of course, but I can go buy a car at any time, and I don't have to and file something. And cars kill more.
Well, we use the cars to drive around, so we have a compelling interest as citizens in that property for that purpose.
Yeah,
and it's a very useful, meaningful purpose for everybody.
I definitely understand.
So we all tend to agree with it, right? And we're like, yeah, cars are very dangerous, and they kill a lot of people, not through through accidents primarily, and not through use as weapons, although they're very effective weapons if people want to use them that way, as we've seen. But we make a compromise, right? They really are one of the most dangerous things in our society. But we accept them because they're also a cornerstone of our economy and livelihood. So we take those lumps. But M16, fully automatic rifles, most people don't see them as a cornerstone of our daily life. They see them as something that people either want because they just think it's really fun, or they want because they want to hurt people, or they fantasize about hurting people.
Well,
there's a lot more resistance.
Let's look in Chicago, where the general assault tool, or the GAT, has become extremely popular, and it has become it can be modified to be fully automatic, or they've been on the black market to buy fully automatic. We're seeing fully automatic weapons being used. So
Yep.
if a fully automatic weapon is being used against me, I don't care if it's some gangster in the hood. I don't care if it's the government. I have the fundamental right to have that same weapon.
No, not really, because a fully automatic weapon isn't any more dangerous to an individual than a single fire weapon. You can go, I've watched lots of gun videos. I'm not a big gun guy myself, but I try to stay informed about any topic I argue on. You'll watch a lot of guys like the bump stock thing.
You just cut out for a second.
Look, oh, sorry. Guy was demonstrating how bump stocks work.
Yeah.
Right. So he was shooting at a target with a bump stock, and he's saying, look, this thing is basically a piece of crap. You cannot hit the target very many times because the gun is ricocheting around. And so I got maybe 3-4 hits. And then he says, let's put that away. He pulls out a semi-automatic rifle, same rifle, but without a bump stock, right? Just on, and ping, 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 right? Mm-hmm. He hits it every time, just about, like he misses a couple times. It's a lot more effective at shooting at an individual target, which is what you want to do normally in self-defense situations, or if somebody is trying to gun you down individually, right? Semi-automatic weapons are better for individual murder. What the bump stock is good for, and what a fully automatic weapon is good for, is what we saw in Las Vegas, which is mowing down into a crowd where you just got a bunch of people. You don't really care which ones you hit, just so long as those bullets are going downrange and doing real damage, right? That's what those weapons are useful for. That, in the military, the purpose of automatic weapons is so you can put a lot of lead downstream because people are usually hunkered in, only just a little bit of them is visible, you know, they get a little helmet of the thing. So you put, you know, hitting an individual thing is going to be really hard, but if you just throw a bunch of lead down, you've got suppressive fire on your side, it pins down the enemy, you can move people around. Automatic weapons are very useful in warfare. They're not very useful if you're trying to self-defend yourself, because not only are you less likely to hit your individual target that's attacking them if you had a well-aimed weapon, but you're very likely to hit somebody else because you're missing with a lot of those bullets. So you're going to hit some kid down the street, you're going to put a bullet into somebody's car. None of that is good. So those weapons don't have a real practical use in self-defense.
And again,
just
I'm not trying to say that automatic weapons are effective for self-defense. I am trying to say that I still hold that the Second Amendment is to prevent against a tyrannical government. Now, whether or not you believe that it is effective for a citizenship to rise against their government is regardless. That is what many founding fathers had the intention of the amendment for. That is what I have the intention for. That's what senators today have the intention for. And so if I have the weapon, if I want a weapon to own for myself, it doesn't matter whether you see the reason, it doesn't matter whether the government sees the reason. I want the gun. And if I'm not a violent criminal and I don't have it, and arguably I don't want to get into the mental illness one, but I don't have a history of mental illness, why not?
Well, that's a self-defeating argument. Look, you're saying that whatever the government says, I don't care. I have the right to thing it because I want it and because some people back in history said that maybe I should have it, right? But who cares what the Supreme Court, who actually decides what the law says, who decides the meaning of the Constitution says? You just want your own meaning of the Constitution, and that's what you're going to use to justify.
No,
so you don't care what I think, but you care what you think. You don't care what the law thinks, but you do want to justify it with the law.
No,
so that's really contradictory.
Okay, so I care what the law thinks, and I think that's a misconception.
Well, the law thinks that there are limitations to the Second Amendment, and it does not include your right to have an automatic weapon.
And I can respectfully disagree with what the law thinks without not caring what the law thinks. I don't think that's
right. But you said it doesn't matter what the law says. If I want to have that weapon, I'm going to have that weapon.
That's
what I heard.
And I think it should be repealed. I'm not saying that I'm going to break the law because I still think that I should abide by the law. I'm not arguing that we should break the law here. I'm arguing.
I thought that's what you were saying.
No. I'm arguing that the NFA should be repealed, and that that should be allowed for fully automatic weapons, suppressors, and SBRs. Now,
for the purpose of fighting the U.S. government.
For the purpose of fighting, yes.
Okay. So once again, let's lay out the scenario. Trump declares that we're going to confiscate all the guns. What happens next? Well, what usually happens is an attorney general in the states file an appeal to the courts. The courts issue an injunction against the president. We saw this with his travel ban. And the president's order goes nowhere. So what does he got to do then? Well, he's got to stack all the courts. He's got to stack all the appeals courts, and he's got to stack the Supreme Court with people who are going to agree with this gun ban. And that takes multiple years, takes multiple presidencies in order to get that kind of a thing done, right? So now he's got the court stacked, right? So he does that. Then what happens is law enforcement can either decide to accept or not accept. They can defy the Supreme Court. It's been done before. Presidents have defied the Supreme Court. Then you've got the protection of the legislature, who can pass a law that says that the president's an idiot and he can't do that. So you've got to also stack the entire legislature with people who don't believe in the Second Amendment. Then you've got to have the military, as you said, if they take an order that they think is fundamentally objectionable to their to the American values that they have. And the American military is very strongly value-focused. Most military people I know, strong Second Amendment supporters, strong supporters of most of the Bill of Rights. They're going to refuse, just like you said. All those things have to fail, right? So you've got to have Congress, the United States, the Supreme Court, and the military on board with this tyranny before there's any tyranny that you can fight with your individual weapons. Are you really, we're going to go underground, we're going to organize, right? You're really going to beat that? If they could align all those forces together, you are going to defeat them.
It doesn't matter whether or not it's a matter of fighting the injustice. Whether or not it's
the injustice already got fought, right? I mean, you lost
your
already.
Scenario here. Let's say that they really are in this extreme scenario that I don't think would happen is actually happening. Are you telling me that I should genuinely turn on my belly and cower to it, or that I should?
No, but it doesn't matter. You're going to die anyway.
It doesn't matter.
The fact is, you're toast.
The thing
right?
is,
so my point is that if you really want to protect your Second Amendment, right, you're not going to do it with your machine gun. You're going to do it with a lawyer. You're going to do it with politicians.
Okay,
you're going to do it by voting.
Again, we're playing out your scenario. Everything that you said has already happened. That is past lawyers. You have to agree.
Okay, yeah, well, then you've lost. I mean, your rights are going to do nothing because you'll be dead.
Okay, again,
or prisoner of the state or something.
That, but like, look at the Revolutionary War when only 3% of colonists fought. You would have a lot.
The Revolutionary War was won by the standing army George Washington commanded.
Yes,
federal army.
3% of colonists that he built up of people. Are you saying that people can't build? Yeah. How did the standing army come into place in the first place? Did it just appear out of nowhere, or was it citizens that disagreed with the tyranny that gathered arms and fought against the tyranny?
Yeah, well, that's the United States military today, right? I mean, it's the same kind of military. It's got the same kind of people in it. If you really think they're all going to suddenly turn on us and abrogate our free will, stuff has already gone straight to hell.
The thing is,
right?
Your argument is that we should turn over and yield if something like that happens. And I'm not saying that something like that.
No, not at all. No, fight. You're just going to lose. That's all.
Yes, so I should have my right to fight. It's the thing is,
no one takes away your right to fight just because you don't have a machine gun. It doesn't matter if you're going to have a machine gun or a semi-automatic rifle. You're going to lose anyway.
The thing is like, let's look at the social the social contract of Jean-Jacques Rousseau. I'm probably butchering his name, but the idea that we yield some of our freedoms in exchange for government protections, and if the government fails to protect the rights that we receive, we have the right, and not only that, but the duty to remove that government. Firearms,
if you can, yes.
Firearms in the Second Amendment give us a fighting chance at that.
No, they don't. It's not a fighting chance at all. You'll lose. You'll be utterly annihilated.
Why do you say that?
Because the United States military is the most powerful military the world has ever seen. They can destroy an entire city with one weapon in about 10 seconds.
I want to quote. I want to
gone.
Again,
right? You think your
M16 the same things about Britain in the Revolutionary War. I want to quote Thomas Paine.
No, that's a very different time. They did not have nuclear weapons in the Revolutionary War. They had muskets. They took like 6 seconds to load.
They had muskets, but they had plenty of other artillery that far outmatched and far outnumbered. I'm not saying.
Yeah, but the difference between a cannon and a musket is nothing like the difference between an M16 and a cruise missile. He's just no comparison.
Yes. So again,
cannons, you can sneak up in the middle of the night, rush the guys who are holding the cannons, and take the cannons. That's what they did in the Revolutionary War most of the time. You get out behind and above the cannons; they're pretty easy to take out. How are you going to sneak up and take out the the aircraft carriers or in the middle of the night disarm the nuclear missile silos or the Air Force bases. That is not going to happen.
I want to quote Thomas Paine here. He says, "Tyranny, like hell, is not easily conquered. Yet we have the consolidation with us that the harder the conflict, the more glorious the triumph."
Whatever, right? I mean, that's brave words, but they're not going to do anything.
I understand that it's brave words, but the thing is I'm not arguing that fighting tyranny is easy or that it's the best thing, that it's the easy way out. I'm not arguing the Second Amendment is the easy failsafe where we go, checkmate, we have guns. The purpose of the Second Amendment is to be able to have a fighting chance against our government. Without that fighting chance, we are no better off than Uganda, Cambodia, China, Germany, Soviet Union, Turkey, where guns were confiscated and mass genocides took place and mass executions.
That's fantasy. Those places had military conflicts. The people did fight back and they lost.
Because
that's what happened there.
Some of them
not because they didn't have guns. They had guns. They tried to use them and they lost. Yeah, the government passes laws when they want to be a tyrannical government that says, hey, you're not
You cut out for a second.
Weapons. Look, Japan doesn't have guns. They have laws against guns. They don't have a tyrannical government. They haven't been murdered or slaughtered. It's not a guarantee. The will to power, the will to destroy and conquer others is what makes tyranny possible, along with force. And the United States government, if you think somehow magically it's going to turn into an evil Hydra government and oppress the American citizens, we will never have enough force to stop it because we have created and built such a monstrously powerful, incredibly focused military. If you really think that this is if you think any of this is true, you should take a page of what the Founding Fathers said and say, we need a much, much smaller military. We need to shrink the size of the United States Armed Forces down such that it would be realistic for the militias in order to defeat them.
And I can agree
Until you do that, it's meaningless.
I can agree
then the real focus, should not be on the Second Amendment. It should be on decreasing the size of the United States military.
But why can't we?
And we do that.
Why can't we do both?
Well, we could do both.
So the thing is like you're saying that we can't do both. We absolutely could.
But I never see gun rights activists arguing for a smaller military. Every single time I see them arguing for a bigger military.
Well, they could absolutely be wrong, and it could just be a foolishness. But the thing is I think earlier in your argument when you're talking about like the states putting in gun control to promote safety and things like that, I think that we misconceive that foreign leaders don't always have putting in gun restrictions in to promote our own safety. I think they promote it for control, to make an easier population to control.
What kind of control? Look, they have strict gun control in Hawaii. What kind of horrible regime?
Okay, let's not look at America. Let's look
nasty, vicious things.
Let's look at other countries. Let's look at Canada.
Let's look at the UK.
Japan. Let's look at Europe.
Japan.
No.
Let's look at Japan.
Yeah.
Okay. All right,
we can look at all those.
UK. Sure.
We can look at all of them.
What kind of terrible, evil, oppressive programs?
Where is Canada's?
Britain implementing?
Where's Britain's free speech? Where is it?
Well, I believe it would be in Britain's press. They can say whatever they like.
No, they can't, because there have been British reporters that have been fined and jailed for saying offensive things, of things like assuming genders and other things like that. That has been hate speech. There's been tweets coming out from Scotland Yard that have said, like, we're watching what you tweet, and there have been fines. Canada.
That sounds like conspiratorial bullshit.
No, it's tweets. I can pull them up for you, and I can comment the links after this debate.
Yeah, put them in. Yeah, put them in after
I absolutely will. But Canada has a state-run media facility, and there have been comedians that have been fined upwards of $35,000 for making improper and offensive statements and things like that. They don't have the same freedom of speech that we do.
Yeah, well, hold on.
Yeah.
If you're going to say, I want to get on the radio and call people niggers that need to be killed, right, or a bunch of kikes who should have all been burned in the Holocaust, I might be sympathetic to saying, you know what? Fuck you, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to hear that. You can take that roadshow somewhere else. I don't consider that tyrannical, because these people are the ones who are being aggressive. They're initiating violence through their actions of words against other groups of people who are fellow citizens. And that's bullshit. And I generally am a free speech guy, and I'm like, well, okay, if you want to get on and say that, I'll generally angle towards, we should allow that. However, I don't see it as tyranny when we decide that we want to fine people for attacking other members of society in such an aggressive fashion. So, you know, that to me is not tyranny. Tyranny is when you come for me and you say, guess what, Sig, you're going in the labor camp. I mean, it's not like we never do any of these things. We did intern 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II, right? We did enslave the black population of America we imported for 200 years. So it's not like we're beyond tyranny here in America. Second Amendment or no Second Amendment, right? These things happen.
I'm not saying that we haven't overlooked tyranny in America. And I'm not, I should have worded in Canada and in the UK a little bit more carefully, because I'm not saying that that is the ultimate tyranny. But you're seeing that to being the start of an abuse of freedom of speech and a control over what the population can and can't say, whether it's assuming someone's gender wrong or if it's speaking out against.
Yeah, no one's getting arrested saying somebody's gender is wrong. That's there's
a Canadian man who is fined $35,000 in a comedy club for making insensitive jokes about transgenders.
What did he say?
I don't have the quote exactly, but it was he had been hospitalized. It was oh gosh, I'm sorry, I don't have. I'm gonna.
Well, you can post it afterwards. I want to read it just out of intellectual curiosity, right? But I find a lot of these things pretty spirit. You know, usually when I dig in, it's not what people say it is. But look, I just don't buy these fantasies that they're going to creep and take our guns away. That because we don't, when every time, because they're always in response to some kind of action that people do that's kind of heinous and scares everybody, and they're like, geez, we don't want this anymore. We got to do something about that. So that's usually how most of these actions start. They're not creeping, tyrannical people who've got a master Hydra plan to take over the United States.
Well, are you aware of Operation Jade, Helm?
No, tell me about it.
Okay, so Operation Jade Helm was a 10-statewide military drill conducted by Barack Obama in 2015, in which they practiced things like martial law and things like gun confiscation. Now,
I've read about that. That's also bullshit.
I was in Utah during the drills. I was there. It wasn't
not what they claimed it was. It was a military exercise, and the military does run exercises.
Yes,
but it was not a practice to confiscate people.
No, and it wasn't framed around American citizens. I'm not trying to frame this as a conspiracy. So it's just
you did.
No, let me finish. All right. So it was when it was mainly operated under practicing in the Middle East, where they actually had to go in and do these things. So that is what it is. Now, for the drills, they labeled Utah, Texas, and Southern California as hostile territories. Now, I'm not trying to get into diving into the meaning, but Texas called in their state militia because they freaked out about this, and they had them monitor all of the drills. Utah called in their National Guard to monitor all these troops during the drills because they were very, very suspicious. Now, whether or not that was something, you saw a mobilization of American forces going, hey, this isn't okay. This was a step too far. We're going to we're not saying you're doing something wrong, but we're going to monitor what's going on. So what I'm saying is whether it's individual citizens, whether it's states banding together, if the government in that frame scenario of Trump anybody building up all that stuff to get it, it is not outlandish that the Second Amendment could defend against tyranny. I think it's laughable to say that it wouldn't defend against tyranny. And now, whether or not it would be hard, whether or not many people would die, whether or not it would be very, very bloody, that's totally different. But to say that United States citizens have no chance of preserving their country if they saw that it go too far, I don't think that's true. I think that they definitely could have a chance.
You think that, but it doesn't happen. I mean, show me one instance in history where a tyrannical government with an overwhelmingly strong military was defeated by individual citizens with small arms. In modern history.
Again, okay. In modern history, there hasn't been a whole lot of that.
It's been tried many times.
Yes, but
there's lots of rebels all around the world.
Yes. But in these countries, did they innately have the building and the culture of America? Like
a lot of places. But here's the point. When you say that, American culture is about obedience to the law and the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So if you get your scenario where there's this great tyranny, all that has already failed. American culture has abandoned you, and we've become Hydra in America. That's become our new idealism. Because if that's not our idealism, if we're all still patriotic Americans, this kind of government takeover is never going to happen, because there are so many checks and balances in our very wise political system that will stop all of that.
Yeah, and isn't that the beautiful thing? Is that with the framing of this Constitution, with inclusion of the Second Amendment.
And the Second Amendment doesn't have jack to do with most of that. It's an archaic idea that is no longer relevant. Other than, now, I really do believe individuals have a free, an inherent right to self-defense, but the whole idea that you're going to overcome the government with the state militias is completely bunk. It's never worked, never will work, and the realities of that time are gone.
Yeah. I definitely respect your opinions. I really doubt we're going to see eye to eye on this one, but I hope you have a great night, man.
Thanks for debating with me.